So, have you ever really stopped to think about what drives a country to do, well, anything? Why do they send troops halfway across the world or decide to claim a huge chunk of frozen ocean? There's this powerful and sometimes kind of invisible force behind it all, and it's called national interest. Let's really dig into what that means.
Okay, so we're not going to start with some boring textbook definition. Nope. Instead, let's go to the top of the world, where there's this high-stakes drama playing out, literally, right underneath the North Pole's ice cap.
You can almost hear the frustration in that quote, right? That was the pretty fiery response from Canada's foreign minister back in 2007. And why? Because a Russian submarine had just dived thousands of feet to the bottom of the ocean and planted a Russian flag right on the seabed of the North Pole. I mean, talk about a bold move.
But here's the thing, this was never really about just a flag. The real prize here is control over shipping routes, like the Northwest Passage. As the Arctic ice continues to melt, this waterway is becoming a potential shortcut between the Atlantic and Pacific. That's a total game changer for global trade.
And you can bet countries like Canada are not just sitting on the sidelines watching this happen. They are actively out there, running military exercises, conducting sovereignty patrols. They're making it crystal clear to the rest of the world that they consider these waters and the land beneath them their own.
So what's with this big scramble for the Arctic? Well, the stakes are just massive. We're talking about new shipping lanes that could be 25% faster than going through the Panama Canal. There could be a quarter of the world's undiscovered oil and gas just sitting there, not to mention huge deposits of minerals like diamonds and uranium. And of course, there's just raw national pride and security. It's basically a giant economic jackpot hidden under all that ice.
Which brings us right back to the core question here. What is this incredibly powerful motivation? What drives a country to do something like this? This is where we get to the whole concept that explains all these different actions.
So, let's break it down. National interest. It's a phrase you hear on the news all the time, but what does it actually really mean?
At its simplest, national interest is really just the set of goals a country decides are the most important for itself. You can think of it as a nation's playbook for its own success, and in some cases, its very survival.
And you can pretty much boil down every major decision a nation makes to these three core drivers. First, survival and security, protecting your people and your borders. Second, economic growth and power. And third, making sure the quality of life for your citizens is maintained or improved. And hey, if we look back at that scramble for the Arctic, it checks all three of these boxes, doesn't it?
But see, it's not that simple. Pursuing these interests creates this fundamental tension in how a country sees its place in the world. Do you focus inward on your own people, or do you look outward at the global community?
And this really leads to two competing philosophies. On one hand, you have the nationalist view, which says, hey, we need to focus on our own citizens first. Our money and our efforts should be spent at home. But then you have the internationalist view, which argues that in a world as connected as ours is today, taking care of the global community is actually a really smart way to take care of yourself.
It's like what the former EU Commissioner Christopher Patten said here. Even the biggest, most powerful countries have to look beyond their own borders. The internationalist idea is that sometimes helping others is the most strategic and selfish thing you can do to help yourself in the long run.
Now here's a twist. The very idea of a nation can be more complicated than you think. Because the pursuit of a collective interest, it doesn't just apply to countries like Canada or Russia that you see on a world map. It can also apply to a nation inside another nation state.
And to really get our heads around this, let's look at a fascinating case study from right inside Canada, the Nisga'a Nation.
So the Nisga'a people have lived in the Naas River Valley for, well, basically forever. For them, a core national interest was getting legal recognition of their Aboriginal title to their ancestral lands. It was about having their deep historical connection to this place affirmed in law. And after decades, decades of fighting for this through the courts and in political arenas, they did it. In the year 2000, a truly historic treaty was signed. It was the first of its kind in British Columbia since colonial times, and it recognized Nisga'a ownership over a huge territory. This quote from the Nisga'a Nation's vision statement, it just gets right to the heart of everything. It makes it so clear that their national interest was never just about square kilometers of land. It was about securing the very foundation of who they are, their culture, their language, their entire way of life for generations to come.
So, what happens when you take this pursuit to its absolute limit? What happens when the most fundamental national interest a group has is the right to exist as its own independent country?
And that brings us
to the incredible story of East Timor. It's a powerful, powerful example of a nation's fight to become a sovereign, recognized country on the world stage.
And their fight for nationhood was just harrowing. They declared independence from Portugal in 1975, and only 9 days later, they were invaded by Indonesia. What came next was a brutal 24-year occupation that cost 250,000 lives. It's a staggering number. And yet their pursuit of their national interests never stopped. And finally, in 2002, they became a fully independent country. And here's the thing. East Timor's story is far from unique. This desire for self-determination is such a powerful global force that it has completely redrawn the map of the world. Just in the last few decades, we've seen the collapse of huge states like the USSR and Yugoslavia, which led to the birth of dozens of new countries.
Just think about that for a second. The fall of just one single political entity, the Soviet Union, created 15 new countries. That's 15 new sets of borders, 15 new governments, and 15 new and unique national interests, all competing and cooperating out there on the world stage. So when you put it all together, the mad dash for the Arctic, the fight for cultural survival, the incredibly bloody birth of new nations, it all leaves us with a really critical question for our future. In a world where resources are getting scarcer and borders are always being contested, at what point does one nation's interest become a risk for all of us?